Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we are delighted to be hosting Professor Dorothy Brown, who's here to talk about her new book, Getting to Reparations, how building a different America requires a reckoning with our past. Dorothy's a law professor, known as an advocate for economic and social justice, and for her work on the racial implications of federal tax policy. She's been on the law faculty at Georgetown since 2022, and before that taught at Emory, Washington and Lee, George Mason, and the University of Cincinnati. Her previous book, The Whiteness of Wealth, examined how the U.S. tax code widens the wealth gap between white and black Americans. She's also written 2 legal textbooks, one on federal income taxation, the other on cases and materials related to critical race theory and how it applies in such basic legal fields as contracts, property, civil and criminal law, and procedure. In her new book, Dorothy presents a strong argument for providing reparations to Black Americans, not just to atone for the original sin of slavery, but also for years of subsequent very significant harm resulting from labor exploitation, wealth stripping, denial of full citizenship, mass incarceration, and other actions. Dorothy actually was once skeptical of the idea of reparations for Black Americans, considering it unrealistic and impractical. But her mind started to change a few years ago after a colleague mentioned that reparations had been paid to the families of 11 Italian Americans who were lynched by a mob in New Orleans in 1891. Her book documents several other situations in which compensation has been paid by the federal government to other groups that suffered the types of injury or loss experienced by Black people in America, but never to Black Americans. So I'm sure she'll talk about those cases in a minute. She is herself a descendant of once enslaved people and outlines in her book some practical steps for getting to reparations for Black Americans, beginning with a federal commission that would be established by executive order of the president. Compensation, she argues, should include not only cash payments to individuals, but also funding for systematic reforms. Hopefully, her thoughtful and compelling book will encourage further public debate and positive action on this important subject. In conversation with Dorothy will be Erin Haynes, a journalist who writes about politics, civil rights, voting rights, and race. After stints at the LA Times, Orlando Sentinel, and Washington Post, Erin served as the national writer on race for the Associated Press from 2017 to 2020. She then became a founding member of and editor-at-large for the nonprofit news outlet, the 19th. So please join me in welcoming Dorothy Brown and Erin Haynes.
How's it going? Oh, yeah, okay, that's good. You all can hear me. Perfect. Well, listen, I really appreciate all of you for coming out on this chilly night that it's about to get chillier in the rest of the week. But I have to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Professor Brown, for having me to be in conversation with you as somebody who makes me sound smarter all the time. I'm so happy that I get to be here to talk to you about this book, which I'm very excited about. Because, look, let's just be honest. We're gathered at a moment when conversation about race and wealth and democracy are also often reduced to sound bites if they're talked about at all, right? So what makes tonight different, what feels different tonight, is that getting to reparations is really insisting on clarity, right? It's asking us to confront something that many of us have been taught to treat as neutral or inevitable. This issue of the tax code, which you have talked about for so long and have helped me to understand so much more clearly. So you're making a powerful case in this book that the racial wealth gap in this country is not the result of individual failure, cultural deficiency, or a lack of personal responsibility. It is the predictable outcome of public policy that was designed and implemented and sustained over generations. So, what I love for this, and I'm encouraging all of you to read this book because you are really just pushing us to consider reparations not as a symbolic gesture, not as a political provocation, but as a serious question of democratic responsibility, right?
Right.
If government policy helped to create inequality, what does repair actually require? So, again, I'm honored to be in conversation with you. Let's get to this conversation. I want to start by really just talking about what really has been, I think, your life's work, the question of inequality by design.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's start by dispelling some myths about race and wealth, shall we?
Okay.
Okay. So, one of the most powerful interventions that you make in this book is really insisting that the racial wealth gap is not accidental, it is engineered. What is the most persistent myth about race and wealth that getting to reparations is trying to dismantle?
Ooh, that's such a good question.
I try.
The most, yeah, I love this woman. The most persistent myth is that Black Americans are not hardworking, that Black Americans lack financial literacy. So we're not hardworking, we don't know what to do with our money, and we are sitting waiting for a government check. And what I show in part 2 of the book is what happened to Black Americans after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was enacted. We built wealth. We started businesses. And people took it away. The government took it away. Eminent domain, lynching, the person, your next door neighbor, your white next door neighbor who didn't like the fact that you owned a house. So they killed you and took it away. So what I saw was an intentional system that stripped wealth from Black Americans. First, it was designed for Black Americans to never produce wealth. And because of our exceptionalism, we left slavery with nothing, but we managed to buy land. We managed to have homes. We managed to start businesses. And we were building wealth. We were electing state and federal officials. And white Americans didn't like that version of equal. They didn't like equality, and that certainly was a version of equality that they were averse to. So they figured out ways to strip Black Americans of wealth. And I think about an analog today with respect to. So when I look at what's happening in Minnesota, and I see that people are pulled out of cars, they're taken from their homes. And what nobody is talking about is who's getting that property. Who's getting that car? Who's getting the purse with the cash that was left in it? And in the book, I talk about the Japanese American reparations. And they had businesses and they had homes, and they lost everything when they were mass incarcerated. And the commission that was put together to study it documents the economic, psychological, and physical harm. So we see this white supremacist wealth stripping so that white Americans can get more wealth, not because it's merited, not because they earn it. In many instances, because they stole it. In the book, I talk about an example where a courthouse was burned because that's where title to Black homes was. So they wanted to make sure Black Americans couldn't prove they owned the property, so it'd be easier to steal. So this myth that we're lazy, we don't work hard, we want somebody to give to us. No. What the opening story in the book is how we got to field order number 15, which basically says the 20 Black ministers that met with Secretary of War Stanton and General Sherman said, leave us alone. Give us land so we can till it and take care of ourselves. And after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, that's what happened, but then it was taken. So, when I got to the end of the Whiteness of Wealth, I realized even if we fixed the tax code tomorrow, that wouldn't fix the racial wealth gap. So by the end of the book, I knew my next book was going to be about reparations.
Wow. I wish I knew what my next book was.
I even know what my next book after
LOL.
this is going to be about.
See what I mean? Just showing off, showing off. No, but I mean, I think what you are naming is so important, especially in this era of erasure and exclusion. You are talking about history that is still with us. It is still very present with us. It is still having a lot of bearing on the lives of Black Americans today. And so that is part of the case for reparations that you are laying out. I want to talk about what you brought up and something that really you have illuminated for me. And I think that this book will continue to illuminate for folks. You talked about the whiteness of wealth, which is when the light bulb first went off for me around the tax code as a racial actor, right?
Yes.
That was a light bulb because I had never thought about it in those ways before. I think that's intentional, right?
That's right.
You are making invisible systems visible. You argued that the tax code rewards whiteness without ever naming race, right?
Right.
This is one of the most powerful ways that inequality is maintained. First question I want to ask you around this is why you think tax policy in particular has been allowed to escape moral scrutiny for so long.
Oh, that's such a good question. And it speaks to how hard it was for me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I read this. So how I got into the whiteness of wealth was as a good daughter with an LLM in tax. I did my parents' tax returns. So I'm living in New York and I'm an investment banker, and by myself, I'm making the same amount of money that my parents together were making. Mother's a nurse, father's a plumber, and they made incomes really close together. One year, mommy would beat daddy. The other year, daddy would beat mommy. Depending on, he was a plumber for the New York City Housing Authority, depending on how much overtime my father get. He loved going in on holidays. I'm like, Daddy, why are you leaving? Triple time, he'd say as he's leaving the office. I'm like, okay. And I read this statistic that said 40% of married Black women contribute 40% to household income. When I did my parents' tax returns, I always got the feeling they were paying too much. I paid more than them because you have a progressive tax system, but they were really close to me, and there's no reason why they should have been, and I couldn't figure it out. And as an investment banker, I didn't have time to think about it. I was like, okay, get the taxes off. Okay, got to go to work. When I became a law professor, one of the best parts of this job is they pay me to think. Yes. So one day,
I enjoy that as well.
One day, as I'm stalling, I'm supposed to be preparing to teach partnership tax. And I'm like, let me read something else instead. Mm-hmm. And I read this article that said, how do you know there isn't a race and tax problem if you don't look? I'm like, oh my God, could there be a race and tax problem? So I picked up the phone. I called my mentor who had written the article. And I said, Jerome, I'm going to write something on it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write something on it. He goes, go for it. That's when I realized the IRS doesn't publish statistics by race. Okay, well, that could have been the end of that project. The government tells us who rides bicycles by race, but we don't know who pays taxes by. Yeah, okay.
Why wouldn't we want to know that information?
Okay. So I'm like, wait a minute. So I'm born and raised in the South Bronx. I've heard people tell me what I can't do. I just ignore it. So the fact that there aren't statistics, I can figure this out. And I reverse engineered. I read race work and applied my tax lenses to it. So there's a lot of race work on home ownership, on marriage, on college, on all the things that the tax code interacts with. And I came across a statistic that said married Black women, 40% of it. And I thought, that's why my parents pay so much in taxes. Because what you don't know that I know is if you're contributing 40% to your household, you're paying a marriage penalty. Y'all would be better off single. Now, I knew that, but anyone in the sociology realm who was reading that wouldn't just say, yeah, married Black women are more likely to work, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, so the light bulb went off. And I was doing this work that wasn't being done, but I was also facing a lot of backlash. So the tax law profession, certainly tax law professors, are predominantly white, predominantly male. And they went into tax law like I did. Janice, they went into tax law like I did to get away from race. Race has nothing to do with tax. It's economics. It's math. I love math. It's numbers. I love math. So when I'm presenting my work, they're like, oh, Dorothy, it's not race, it's class. And I'm like, it's not class, it's race. But it made my work better because I then talked about race and class. So when, okay, you think it's class? Well, let me tell you about married black wives. It doesn't matter what income level. Married black couples are more likely to pay a marriage penalty. You want to talk class? Good. Low income, middle income, high income. I think that means it's race. So I found a lot of resistance because when we talk about tax policy, it's colorblind.
Yeah.
It's
Sure.
neutral.
And that's how they escape the moral scrutiny. Yeah. As you all are going down the rabbit hole on the Dorothy Brown syllabus, I encourage you to read the article that she wrote about the Obama's taxes. Um, yeah. Well, you're talking about race and class and gender. Everything is racial. Everything is gendered, by the way. That's, you don't have to dig very deep either
No.
to get there. Well, you talked about how you kind of unpack some of this in the Whiteness of Wealth. Walk us through one example from this book that best illustrates kind of what you're talking about in practice.
So I think about Tommy Moss, and he worked for he was a postal carrier in Memphis. He worked for the post office. He had a good government job. He was married. They had a home. I would say he was the perfect black in 1890s. He was besties with Ida B. Wells. And he helped other black people become postal workers. He started a grocery store with two of his friends, and he started the People's Grocery. And it was to give a safe space for Black Americans to buy groceries and not be harassed and not be treated like second class citizens. And he's doing great work. And he got lynched. And it started when two little boys were playing a game and they got into a fight. A black boy, a white boy. And the white boy's father came out, and because the black boy was winning, the white boy's father came out and started beating the black boy. Well, the folks who worked at the People's Grocery said, no, no, not on my watch. So they go out and they stop it. Well, the white father gets the police, they come back, somebody gets shot, they get arrested, and they're waiting to see whether the police officer will live. The Tennessee Rifles are keeping watch because they understand lynching is a possibility. And the police officer lives, so they think they're fine. Well, they go home, and Moss and Calvin and the other gentlemen are lynched. And as they're being lynched, I think Moss's last words were "Go west, because there's no justice for us here." And that story really resonates with me because they, Tommy Moss and his wife, they were the perfect blacks. They weren't agitators. He believed in just minding your business, uplift of the community, helping other people, had a business, had a home, and they were run out of town. And that's so similar to so many other stories, including one in my own family, my Uncle Billy.
Yeah.
So actually my wonderful editor who is here once said to me, Dorothy, I want you to dig a little deeper in your own family. I said, well, my mother's coming to visit. Let's talk. So my mother talks about Uncle Billy. And I remember Uncle Billy, the only lawyer in my family. And Uncle Billy, my mother thought, was run out of South Carolina, Sumter, South Carolina, because he took civil rights cases. That's what mommy thought. Not the truth. That's what mommy thought. So I have the library at Georgetown, wonderful library at Georgetown, do research, and I found out that yes, Uncle Billy was run out of town. Yes, they burned a cross on his lawn. Yes, yes, yes. But it was because he ran for city council. It was not because he represented civil rights cases. He did that all along. He ran for city council. He lost. They burned a cross, and they sent a clear signal: don't do this again. So he sold the house, I'm sure not for a market price. They got out of town. The book tells so many stories about Black Americans painstakingly building wealth for white Americans to wind up with it.
And you're
Oh, because the Tommy Moss grocery, it was sold at auction for pennies on the dollar, and it was bought by the white proprietor of the only other grocery store in Memphis who wanted that store from the beginning, and it was part of those who lynched him.
surprising, not surprising. Uh, Professor Brown, I think that you are also just making such a good point about the case for reparations that is in so many of our own families, if only we will talk to our family members about, what is owed and to whom and why, right? To help folks be able to articulate
Right.
what is. I mean, those stories live within our own families. I also am thinking about those colleagues that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Folks who, because the language is not race coded, but we know that the code is
Right.
racially, has racial impacts. Those kind of people say things like, "Oh, that's just how the system works," right?
Or my favorite, Dorothy, everybody knows blacks are poor and don't pay a lot in taxes. That was my favorite.
Everybody knows.
Everybody knows
Okay.
that.
Well, I mean, what do they mean when they say that? And also, more importantly, I think, what are they actually excusing?
Well, okay, so in this setting, I was at a law professor conference and I was speaking to a couple hundred people. I thought I did relatively well. The first question was, Dorothy, everybody knows your work is irrelevant. And first of all, I'm like, well, thank you. Welcome to my world. First of all blacks are not poor. So if you're a tax law professor and you're supposed to be able to do math, you don't know that all blacks are not poor. You don't know that 20% is not 100%. Okay, so there's a problem, educational malpractice. And the notion that poor people don't pay a lot in taxes is a lie from the pit of hell. Again, why
Rebuke it.
why you
We
teach a
rebuke
tax?
it. We reject it. Yeah.
So it's, we don't want to talk about this race stuff because it's just not relevant because I know nothing about race, but I know it's not relevant.
And if I don't know anything about it, it must not be relevant.
Exactly, because I know the important stuff.
Yeah. Let's transition into, because again, you are making the case that what you are making the case for is not something symbolic. It is about repair. So we want to
Right.
get beyond abstraction, help people who may be also trying to find language for why this needs to happen. The word reparations, we know it can often be a non-starter, triggers defensiveness, dismissal, not even just from white folks, but from others.
Right.
Before people can even engage with really the substance of that argument. So I want to ask you about how grounding reparations specifically in tax policy can change what this conversation looks like. I mean, we're in tax season right now, right? So
Yes.
good time to talk about this. And also just kind of what that kind of conversation demands.
So when we talk about reparations, and in the introduction, you were told I was a skeptic, and I was. It was like, ugh, we're not going to get anywhere with this. Why are we even talking about this? And then
It was a non-starter for you.
It was a non-starter for me. And then my former Emory colleague says in her foreign relations course, the students find out that Italy paid reparations for Italians lynched in Louisiana. I said, hold up. Well, I said a bad word, but I won't say that here, okay? I said, what? We paid white people who were, on behalf of white people were lynched, but not black people who were the majority of people lynched? Yes, ma'am, she said, and then we planned lunch. I never moved on, okay? I was like, if we paid for lynching, I wonder if we paid for anything else. So the next thing I discovered was the DC Emancipation Compensation Act of 1862, where enslaved workers in DC were freed and the enslavers were paid. So $1 million out of the treasury was allocated. Okay. And the enslavers filled out a petition, they proved ownership, they signed loyalty oaths, and they got cash. So there's slavery, there's lynching. I knew about Japanese Americans and mass incarceration. And then the other thing I found out was economic exploitation and land theft. We paid tribal nations for land that we stole and land that we paid too little for. So, economic exploitation, land theft, slavery, lynching. That encompasses the Black experience after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were enacted. Okay, I said, that's it. I'm on board. We can do this because there's precedent. And each of those examples are deep case studies that you can read about. So if anybody says we can't do it, say, okay, we did it here. We did it here. We did it this way here. We did a different way here, a different way here. Pick and choose. So it's totally doable. And a lot of Americans across racial lines don't know our history. So that's why there's this push right now to whatever you do, don't teach history of race in America. Because when you learn it, when people learn it, they are actually heartbroken because they think it's not fair. It's not fair that everybody was paid reparations but Black people. And it's not fair that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment didn't work after it was enacted.
And to your point, I think that there are a lot of people, maybe this is a starting point or an opening for people. There are a lot of people in this country that feel like the tax code is not fair. They don't know
Yes.
what's not fair about it. Maybe they don't understand how it's not fair, maybe along racial or gendered lines, but they feel that something doesn't feel fair about it.
Right. And one of the big things about the tax code that doesn't feel fair is how we tax labor versus how we tax capital. Or put it another way, how we tax workers versus how we tax billionaires, okay? Who get their income from stock and it's taxed at a low preferential rate. But you and I work for a living. We are not getting the benefit of a low preferential rate. They come for workers early and often. So we don't have loopholes. We don't have the ability to defer even taxes on our stock because what a lot of billionaires do is they borrow money from the bank, pledging stock, and they live off of the loan proceeds. When you take out a loan, that's not taxable income. So you would live off the income and never pay taxes. That's why Jeff Bezos qualified for COVID payments because he didn't have any money on his income. I'm not making it up. ProPublica talked all about this, okay? Now, he claims to have given it back, but I digress. He got the check, okay? Because his income is so low because billionaires, wealthy people, wind up paying lower tax rates than working class Americans. So they know it's not fair. And every survey you see that is done, Americans say it's not fair. But we don't have, I'll say it, the guts on Capitol Hill when the Democrats were in charge, because they were, don't tell anybody, not too long ago, when they could have fixed it, but I digress. So we have to have, honestly, Americans demanding it. Just basically saying, give us this or the next person will, right? But you have to have an energized base. You have to give people a reason to want to fight. And absolutely, one of my reparations proposals is fixing the tax code so that it would be racially equitable. And I argue that work should not be done at Treasury.
I like what you're bringing up here because what you're talking about is the difference between reparations as a one-time payment, which I know is what a lot of people think about, and also something that is a non-starter for a lot of people, versus reparations as structural repair. So keep going with that.
Yes, so I believe that Black Americans should get a cash payment too, because everybody got cash. So if everybody else get cash, we get cash. But that should not be the majority of the money that's spent on reparations, because I've shown in the Whiteness of Wealth, the system for building wealth is designed to strip Black wealth and enable white wealth. Well, if you gave every Black person, pick the dollar amount. If the system is designed to strip it, it's going to get stripped. The system does what the system does, right? So I want to break up the system and create a new system that would enable Black success to be the norm. Imagine, one of the things I talk about in the book, and I kind of end on this note, people talk about reparations, they complain about it, but nobody ever says, but what could reparations get us?
Yeah.
And what reparations could get us on the other side is this wonderful America where everybody has an equal opportunity to thrive, where there is no system keeping one group many groups back based on the color of their skin. If we were to fix it for Black Americans, it would be fixed for everybody. And that's something that people don't really think about. What reparations would buy us? It would buy us recognition that the norm is we all succeed, right? We've been pitted against each other. We've been told the norm is this zero-sum game and that if you don't succeed, it's your fault, when really the norm is the country should be about empowerment and it should be about thriving and flourishing, and everybody should have a floor below which it is unconscionable to let anyone go. And a reparatory process could get us there.
Wow, I feel like I just heard the new Declaration of Independence. No, but really, Dorothy, I mean, as I'm thinking about America's 250th birthday, you are outlining people's ability to access those inalienable rights, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, talking about perfecting the union. Does this feel like, because I know some people may be thinking, reparations, why are we talking about this in this climate? Why talk about this particularly? I mean, I know you're not psychic. I don't think you are psychic. I'm pretty sure you're not. But you write this
I'd
book.
have a different job if I was.
This book is out, right? I'd be getting the lottery numbers from you after this. You're writing this book as America is preparing to mark its 250th
Yes.
anniversary. That is when this book is coming out. Does that also feel timely to be having a conversation about reparations?
Yes and yes. So I think it's that, and it's also this administration. So I've said, I write in the book, and I've said it before, the Trump administration is going to help us get reparations. And here's how. There are a lot of white Americans who are checked out, who think we live in a colorblind society, and, Black people just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And then you watch what happens in Minnesota, or you watch what happened in Chicago. You watch what, and today's the 22nd. Tomorrow there could be something else crazy. Next week. And it's hard to watch what we're seeing and say we're colorblind. We ain't post-racial. There was a time when Obama was elected, right? Bill Bennett got on TV and said, no Black person can say they can't make it in this country. We're post-racial. No, we ain't. And a lot of people are now seeing that we're not. Because for white Americans, to think we're post-racial is nirvana, because it means you don't have to do anything. You don't have to check your privilege. You don't have to examine your privilege. You don't have to be an ally. You don't have to be a supporter. You don't have to do anything. You just blame the victim. Well, you cannot watch what is happening now. And as I said in the book, I know this administration is just going to continue to do crazier and crazier things, or, as the saying goes, saying the quiet part out loud, right? So, yeah, say it away. Because every time you say something like, this administration wants competent white men, okay, then we look at this administration, okay, how do you define competent? But even if you say that, it's like, okay, so you're leaving out women, you're leaving out people of color. Every time they say something that blatant, somebody else shakes a cobweb out. So I'm excited. I don't know that I'd say excited, but every time they say something else stupid, I'm like, yes, and that, and that, and that. Now tell me we're in a colorblind America, right? So that the awakening that we need, which I think is a continuation of George Floyd's awakening, is a really good thing, because it's so easy and comfortable for white Americans to think this has nothing to do with them. I didn't own any slaves. My parents are immigrants. But what the book talks about is immigrants were able to get land in the Homestead Act in the 1860s. Immigrants were able to come to this country and get FHA insured loans. Immigrants were able to do all things that my ancestors, who have been here forever and ever and ever, could not. So it's about history and teaching history and helping people understand that this really was about race.
Yeah. As much as I am enjoying being in a conversation with you, I know that there are probably some people that are going to have some questions. So I want to say to you all to start thinking of the questions that you want to ask. There's a microphone that's over here to my left, your right, and when you have a question in just a few minutes, I want you to come up and ask your question. But before we get to that, speaking of Black women, oh no, I'm just kidding. We are always speaking of Black women. You brought up Black women, democracy's most reliable participants, as we know.
Yes.
Um, and yet they experience some of the deepest economic penalties that are baked into policy, right?
Yes.
You talk about this. I want to ask you about how your work helps us understand this contradiction, being asked to literally save democracy while being denied its material benefits.
Yeah.
I know, easy question.
Yeah. And, part of me, thinks the answer is always just listen to Black women. Just listen to Black women. And if you find yourself telling a Black woman, I think you're wrong, just listen to Black women. So part of it is, we are the most highly educated group. We have the most debt as a result of being the most highly educated group. We have a double penalty. We are neither white nor male, and the labor market and occupational segregation tells us what jobs we can and cannot have. I am almost a unicorn because I'm a Black woman law professor, tenured, full, right? So it is miraculous that that we have risen to these heights given what we've had to overcome. And I think it's about people deciding that they're not experts. And I think that's really hard. I think we see this in the pundit class. And the pundits, let's just say, are not full of Black women, okay? But they opine, they write op-eds that say the Democrats need to pull back from racial identity politics, which would leave only one side playing racial identity politics, which doesn't seem like a smart strategy to me. And so that we can reach out, which is telling Black women who are the backbone of the Democratic Party that we need to be welcoming to Nazis. We need to be welcoming to racists. We need to be welcoming to Christian white nationalists. No. No. That we need to trust you to protect us in that space. You've never shown us your willingness to protect us. In fact, you've shown us your willingness to ignore us. So to me, it's about exercising our power, exercising our strength, not taking no for an answer. I've had, people suggest, well, Dorothy, maybe you should have put it a different way. What I should sing? I think that's racist. I think that's racist. No, what you don't like is
That was
that I said
catchy.
it. What you don't like is that I said it.
Now available on iTunes along with the book. I love that. No, but and also, I mean, yes, and to your point, Black women, Black Americans, again, democracy's most reliable participants. What does it say about our democracy when its most consistent participants are also among those most structurally excluded from wealth building?
Yes, 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 yes. And how so Black Americans are more pragmatic than any other group on the planet because we've had to be, because
I
we
got
are
in trouble when I said that in the 2016 election.
you get in trouble a lot for no reason whatsoever, for it's like speaking the truth, right? This is why I love this woman, okay? So yes, but we are pragmatic and we are often deciding between the lesser of two evils, because I have ancestors who fought and bled and died, so I have a right to vote. So my not voting is not an option, because I know my ancestors would come in the middle of the night and haunt me. I know it. So I'm just not going to set myself up. So I'm voting, which means I'm voting the lesser of two evils. It's about coalition building, right? It's about getting people perhaps who are not normal, regular voters and saying, here's a platform we could demand, because we actually put these people in office. So I think the conversation, well, let's put it this way. I think we are at a unique moment in time to make progress in a way we haven't because of how bad things are. Now, many of us said, it was going to get this bad. And they're like, oh, you're just, there was this great piece about the Cassandras that basically gave them their flowers. We should have listened to y'all, but we didn't, right? Look, you want to know how bad things are? Just ask a Black woman, right? Because we get sexism, we get racism, we get the intersection of those, and we're used to not having people listen to us, right? Which means we're looking around corners. We're like, okay, if this drops and that drops and that drops, what are we going? So I think we are in a unique moment, but I think what we may be lacking is leadership, right? Without vision, the people perish. And what we need now is a vision for what a political system that would benefit all of us would look like and be inclusive. But I think we're certainly closer today than we were a year ago.
Okay. Well, maybe instead of listen to Black women, it should be ask a Black woman.
Yes.
Y'all come ask this Black woman some questions. Let me hear it.
Very nice.
Right here at the microphone. Questions. I can keep going if y'all don't come up to this microphone and ask.
They're
some
just
questions.
shy. Okay, very
Don't
good.
be shy. Yay. Okay, here we go.
Thank you. This is wonderful. I am a local reparations organizer, so I'm excited about the book. My question is actually a bit tailored to DC. I'm wondering if you've had any conversations in the book about how to craft tax policy to fund reparations proposals, because it seems like we could reverse engineer some of this.
Yes. Okay. Great question. So one of the things I do in the book is I talk about the need for a commission, because we've really never had a comprehensive study of all of it. And the amount of research out there, the amount of oral histories that haven't been captured really needs to take place. And part of what the commission will do is figure out how to pay for it, right? Because one of the first objections you get, well, how much is it going to cost and who's going to pay for it? But we run deficits all the time. The 2025 Tax Act, we had no problem running a deficit there. So I'm like, let's just print money, right? We do that all the time. Why can't we do it for here, right? And of course, there's a real obvious option, billionaires tax. Okay, so I think that is a function of the commission's work. But I toss out a couple of suggestions in the book, and it's taxing labor the same way as taxing income from stock, right? No preferential treatment. Income is income is income. And I also want to commend you and all those working at the state and local level, because you have been keeping this conversation going. Okay, HR 40 has been in Congress since Congressman Conyers introduced it in 1989. In 1989, why 89? Because in 88, the Civil Liberties Act got reparations for Japanese Americans. And Conyers said, wait a minute, you could do it for them, you could do it for us. And they never made it out of committee and never going nowhere, which is why I am, the tax law professor in me is very practical. So I'm like, I want to get us reparations. I'm not futzing around with 535 people on Capitol Hill. I just need one. The next Democrat who's elected president, day one, you sign an executive order creating the Reparations Commission. We're done, okay? But it's got to be a good commission. It's got, I joke, and I think I hurt some of my colleagues' feelings. We can't have any academics on the commission because all we do is talk. We don't really do stuff. We talk. Now, we'll be allowed to testify, but and if you look at the Japanese commission, which was very effective, it had a ton of politicians, because they knew how to get stuff done. So I just want to give a shout out for the state and local reparations folks who are really doing the Lord's work. And DC, by the way, is one of the best tax systems going in terms of taxing the highest income the most, which is always the right answer. You start where you can. You can always tax some more.
Hi.
Hi. Hello, Professor.
Hi, Ariel.
As you know, I'm a healthcare person.
Yes.
And we've had the conversation where these systems, including healthcare, are relics of the same issues that you talk about in this book and the previous book. But you also mentioned something earlier that said you believe that the solution should not come out of Treasury. I know you were just talking about your commission, but I'm curious, could you talk a little bit more about some of the places where you see the opportunities for policy to mitigate some of these historical wrongs?
So first I'll say that in my commission, I have 10 subcommittees, one of which is going to deal with health equity issues, another environmental racism, just across the board, voting rights, lots of other things. And the reason I said tax policy reform from a racial equity perspective shouldn't come out of Treasury is they're just ill-equipped for racial equity. And that's based on my personal experience of 2 years serving on the Treasury Advisory Committee for Racial Equity. The nicest thing I could say is they tried. And I don't even believe that, okay? But I'm just saying the nicest thing I could say, okay? The reality is, I think it's, less than 1% of economists at Treasury are Black women. And I think Black men is similar. Just say that racial equity isn't their focus is an understatement. So what I would want is a real civil rights division of justice that would make sure that all of this stuff was done. Because historically, DOJ's Civil Rights Division understood racial equity. That was what they did. So that I would want a real one, and I'd want to put it there because they did everything.
Question. Why is reparations for Black people treated like the third rail by politicians, especially Black politicians?
I think part of it is the opposition that white Americans have to reparations for Black Americans. So I think part of it is fear that if you support reparations for Black Americans, you'll be thought of as radical, you'll be thought of as somebody who shouldn't get votes, shouldn't get reelected. And I've done work with a political strategy group to focus group test reparations to figure out which messages work. And what we found, to change skeptics to supporters, and what we found is telling people that we've paid reparations to 4 different groups, but not Black people, and that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment didn't fix it. And what the history was after tends to convince people that we need to do better, and we actually tends to convince them to support reparations.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for doing this. So a question I have is about who gets reparations. It's always a hot topic among the diaspora. There are people who argue it should be just people who are descended from slavery. But then on the other hand, like Black immigrants after a generation in this country, you see the effects of weathering and racism. Right. I'm just curious, in your framework, who gets reparations?
So one of the subcommittees for the commission is eligibility. So they'll deal with that. But I also don't punt. I tell you what I think. What I think is if you're Black in America, you get reparations. And here's how I decide all Black Americans. I grew up in New York, and I can't tell you the number of yellow cabs that didn't stop for me. When the yellow cab didn't stop for me, he didn't look at me and say, "You look like you're a descendant of an enslaved person. I'm not going to stop for you. You look like you came from the Caribbean. I'm going to stop for you." No, they say, "You're Black. I'm not stopping." It was Blackness itself that is attached. I mean, ask Amadou Diallo's family, okay, was murdered. Ask the Somalians in Minnesota, okay? So to me, it's easy, but I know that's controversial. So my theory is that's what the commission is designed to do. I'll testify, you testify, and then they'll figure it out. But to me, it's about Blackness. Blackness was the target. It was the carryover from the end of chattel slavery.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Well, I have just a couple more before we conclude and you get to sign in some books, which I know these people have and are eager for you to sign. One question that comes to mind, people may read this book, they may be excited, but to the gentleman's question about, how do you start this conversation? How do you start it, within your own community? How do you start it outside of your community? what is a question that you would suggest to people to open the conversation to people who may not be open to, or who may not have previously been open, or who maybe hadn't even thought about this question previously?
I would say if you knew that the federal government paid reparations for slavery, lynching, economic exploitation, and mass incarceration, but not to Black people who experienced all of it, do you think that's fair? That's the question I'd ask. Because I think people are like, what? And when they hear that it actually happened, their guard gets diminished. Now, one other thing that often comes up is, but there are a lot of people hurting, right? There are a lot of people hurting. Why should we do it just for Black Americans? And it's reasonable to acknowledge a lot of people are hurting, but they're not hurting because the government targeted them because of their race. So there's a difference between you not succeeding in the American dream and you not succeeding because the government said, because of your race, I won't let you succeed. So that's, and we don't need 100%, right? We need to remember, we don't need 100%. We probably need 51, and we're close, okay? So my theory is there are some people it's probably not worth having the conversation with. But that's the pragmatic me, right? I'm like, good luck, have a nice day. I'm happy to move on to the next person. That's the South Bronx in me, is what that is. But those who are willing to have the conversation, I'm happy to have the conversation, mainly because I was a skeptic. I was like, this sounds like, okay. And then when I found out, wait a minute, and here's the best part of the Italy story. Because for whatever reason, Louisianans could not stop lynching Sicilians. 3 different times. 3 different times in 3 different parts of Louisiana. And every time the United States wrote a check, to the point that one of the presidents said, can we do something about this so we can stop writing checks? But they never said anything about Black Americans, okay? So one of the things I say in the book is because the Italians had a country prepared to fight for them.
That's deep. I know you are looking ahead to 2028 in terms of the prospects from a political standpoint, but the political journalist in me has to ask you about whether, I'm old enough to remember 2020 when reparations actually was a topic of conversation in a presidential cycle. That is something that had not happened. Do you predict that reparations could again be a question for presidential candidates in 2028? Do you think it should be a question as we head into the midterms?
Hell yes. Sure. And this is about galvanizing people in the street who don't normally vote or don't see a reason to vote. So to me, given where we are in this country and given the racism we are seeing, if we don't have candidates who are prepared to fight 10 toes down, it's not going to get better. So why would we return them back to office? So let's go all in. So to me, absolutely, and this is where the state and local heroes are keeping this in the news. Every, month, there's another city or another state that's taken up reparations. Yes, that's what we need. And I go back to Ta-Nehisi Coates, who basically wrote that article in the Atlantic in 2014. And his purpose, he said, was so people wouldn't laugh when you said the word. And they ain't laughing. God bless them.
So if reparations are ultimately a test of whether this country is willing to tell the truth about how inequality was created, what do you think is at stake for democracy if we continue to avoid that truth?
Somebody once said, people talk about the cost of reparations, but nobody talks about the cost of not doing reparations. What do we lose when we don't fix this? Because the way I look at it, we're playing nice right now. We're playing nice because we actually think we could fix this. what do we do if we realize we can't fix it? What does anarchy look like? What do the Tommy Mosses and the Dorothy Browns do when we get to the point, you know what, let's burn it down? I didn't say that. I'm just hypothetically, right? So to me, you need Black Americans who want to participate in this system and not go to anarchy. All I'm saying is we are a patient people, but when we see little 5-year-olds snatched out of school and used as bait, I'm telling you, this is not sustainable. So I think what we need are people for the moment who perhaps have never run for office in their life. No, I have no interest in that. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about some of y'all in the audience,
Like
right?
somebody else.
Yes, somebody else. People who have a fire in their belly and will get support because we're hungry. People are hungry right now for somebody who's not afraid. People seem so afraid. And, you know, I used to make a joke when I first became a law professor. I will not be intimidated by a man wearing khaki pants. I'm just not. I stepped over crack files to get to the subway, okay? I can get scared, but not if you packing khaki pants. So I just really think we need leaders for this moment, and I think they're rising up. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think people need to think about what's the price if we don't do it.
Well, Professor Brown, thank you for this book, Getting Reparations. Thank you for your clarity. And thank you so much for insisting that we treat inequality as something that we can name, because that means it's something that we can change. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight to be part of this conversation. Stay safe, be well, and have a good night. You can get your book signed here in a few minutes.